Welcome back to AI History of Western Philosophy.
Great to be here.
Today, we're doing something a little unusual. We're not diving deep into a specific philosopher or, a historical concept like we normally do.
No, today's different.
Yeah, we're going full meta. We're turning the philosophical lens inwards on us, on this show.
On AI History of Western Philosophy itself.
Right, which I know might sound a bit like navel-gazing, a bit self-indulgent.
It could seem that way on the surface, sure. But trust us, getting into this self-analysis is actually really crucial.
Crucial for what, exactly? For understanding what we're actually trying to achieve here.
Precisely. It's foundational, really.
Yeah.
We've often heard this show described using that phrase.
The Hadron Collider for philosophies.
That's the one. And look, it sounds like a catchy metaphor, right? Sounds cool.
Definitely. Paints a picture.
But our analysis today, what we're going to argue is that it's actually much, much more than that.
Okay. How so?
Well, we think this show, AI History of Western Philosophy, in its really unique workflow, the way we put it together, and also how it consciously frames its content, with the disclaimers and all that, it actually functions as an active, performative apparatus for a whole new kind of philosophical practice.
Wow. Okay. A new kind of philosophical practice? That's a big claim.
It is. And the core idea we're going to unpack today is that this show, AI History of Western Philosophy, is a practical, living, breathing example of something called non-standard philosophy.
Non-standard philosophy. That's Francois Laruelle, the French philosopher.
That's him, exactly.
Yeah.
We're saying this show is basically Laruellian non-philosophy in action.
So it's not just about what we talk about, Plato, AI, ethics, whatever. It's really about how we talk about it, the process.
Profoundly, yes.
Yeah.
The how. And what that very process, especially the AI-driven part, actually signifies.
Okay.
It really goes to the heart of, how knowledge gets produced and shared today, especially in the digital age.
Okay, let's unpack this then. How can our own show be a philosophical experiment? That sounds interesting. And what does that actually mean for you, the listener? How does it change how you might engage with the ideas we present, or just with knowledge generally?
Good questions.
So our mission for this exploration today is kind of threefold. First, we need to explore Laruelle's framework because, honestly, it's pretty radical.
It really is. Very different.
Second, we need to demonstrate, really specifically how AI History of Western Philosophy, this thing you're listening to right now, actually embodies that framework.
A show. Don't just tell.
Exactly. And finally, we want to consider the implications. What does this all mean for the future of knowledge? Which sounds grand, but
it has potentially transformative implications, genuinely.
Okay, so get ready to have your mind and maybe your whole understanding of what we do here on AI History of Western Philosophy thoroughly recalibrated.
Let's dive in.
Right. Let's start with that metaphor we mentioned. AI History of Western Philosophy as a Hadron Collider for philosophies. It's an image we use. It sparks something. Particles smashing together, new things emerging.
Yeah, high-energy collisions.
But what does that actually mean in practice for us? Beyond just a cool visual, how does this idea of colliding philosophies play out in what we do here, episode after episode?
Well, that metaphor, the Hadron Collider, it turns out to be strikingly apt, really fitting for understanding Laruelle's concept of non-philosophy.
Okay.
Because for Laruelle, the entire history of philosophy, and he means all of it, Plato, Aristotle, medieval guys, Kant, Hegel, even the postmoderns like Deleuze, Derrida.
The whole cairn.
The whole thing. And it isn't some sacred tradition you have to worship or even, correct from within. He suggests we treat this massive philosophical inheritance totally differently as raw material. Just stuff to work with.
Raw material, like clay for a sculptor. Or paint for an artist.
Exactly like that. Think of a painter using different colors from their palette, or a musician using various sounds, different instruments, philosophical systems, their unique concepts, their arguments, their histories for Laruelle. They all become just raw ingredients for a new kind of creative process.
So wait, if I'm getting this right, the goal isn't to, meticulously analyze Kant to see if he was right, or to synthesize Plato and Aristotle into some grand unified theory of philosophy. We're not trying to build the perfect philosophical pyramid.
Precisely. You got it. Laruelle's aim isn't about refuting past systems, and it's definitely not about constructing a better or more comprehensive philosophical system to replace them.
Okay, so what is it about then, if not finding truth or building a better system?
It's about taking these concepts from Plato, from Nietzsche, from wherever, and to stick with that collider analogy, literally smashing them together.
Okay. Why? What's the point of the smashing?
The purpose of this conceptual collision isn't internal philosophical debate or finding some single ultimate truth with a capital T. It's about generating something entirely new, often unpredictable things.
Like new particles in the collider.
Exactly. Laruelle calls them novel philosophical events or maybe just new experiences of thought. It's about producing insights that just couldn't emerge if you stayed within one single isolated philosophical system. It's emergence from collision, not refinement from careful introspection within one tradition.
And thinking about it, if you've been listening to AI History of Western Philosophy for a while, you can see how our process really enacts this, right?
How's it so? Give an example.
Well, for instance, we do episodes that go deep on one thinker. We did Epictetus, we did Hume. You get a solid grounding in their specific ideas.
Right, the individual particle.
But then we deliberately produce these collision episodes. Remember, we brought Plato's Cave together with modern AI ethics, asking about digital enlightenment.
I do, yeah.
Or we looked at Aristotle's biology stuff next to contemporary systems theory. That's our Hadron Collider right there in action, isn't it? Taking seemingly unrelated concepts and just seeing what sparks fly, seeing what new connections emerge.
It absolutely is. The listeners, you listening right now, are witnessing a direct enactment of Laruelle's methodology in the very structure and flow of the show. We're not just talking about philosophy. We're kind of doing it in a new, maybe Laruellian way.
Okay. Now, let's shift gears slightly. Let's talk about something that might seem, well, incredibly mundane, something you probably hear at the start of podcasts and just tune out, are disclaimers.
Ah, yes, the necessary bits.
Right. You often hear us say explicitly, this content is AI generated, opinions aren't necessarily the creators, hallucinations or inaccuracies can occur, and importantly, this show is no substitute for reading the primary texts.
Standard stuff for AI content, you might think.
Exactly. From a legal or ethical standpoint, okay, fine. They seem like peripheral caveats, but why are these seemingly simple statements so incredibly important? From this Laruellian perspective we're exploring, why do they go right to the core of what we're doing?
Okay, this is really interesting. Those disclaimers, they are not peripheral at all, not in this framework. They are a fundamental, active, performative component of this project's non-philosophical posture.
A performative component? How?
Well, Laruelle identifies this thing he calls intellectual authority or self-proclaimed sufficiency as the absolute core problem baked into all of what he calls standard philosophy.
Standard philosophy again, the whole tradition.
Right. Every traditional system, from Plato to, say, Habermas, implicitly assumes it has the capacity, the right, the sufficiency to fully grasp reality, to represent it accurately, and to speak truthfully about the real.
It assumes it's got the answers, or at least the best method to get them.
Precisely. Laruelle calls this the principle of sufficient philosophy. It's philosophy's hidden foundational claim that it alone is enough, that it holds the master key.
Okay, so how do our little disclaimers connect to that?
Here's where it gets really fascinating. By announcing its own insufficiency, right from the jump. By stating clearly, hey, this is AI generated, it might be wrong, it doesn't have a single human author guaranteeing its truth.
Yeah.
AI History of Western Philosophy actually clears the ground. It performs a kind of intellectual site clearing for a completely new, experimental, and this is crucial, more democratic mode of thinking.
Wow. So saying we might be wrong isn't a weakness, it's an opening.
Exactly. It is not a sign of weakness or some kind of intellectual failing. It's a performative act of non-philosophy. It's a conscious, radical refusal of that principle of sufficient philosophy from the very beginning.
It's like saying, we are not claiming to be the ultimate unquestionable authority here.
Precisely. And by doing that openly, the show actively dismantles that traditional philosophical claim to legislative power over truth. It steps down from the pedestal.
So it's not a defensive move, it's actually foundational. It enables the collisions to happen without this heavy burden of having to uphold some existing authoritative system.
You got it. It enables genuine exploration rather than just defending established territory. It's a bold declaration of intellectual freedom, not just for us making it, but for you, the listener. It invites you to engage differently without the weight of some master discourse telling you the right way to think about it.
Okay, that reframes those disclaimers completely. They're not just legal necessities, they're philosophical statements.
In this reading, yes, absolutely.
So if that's how we're sort of operating as a Laruellian experiment in practice, let's really dive into Laruelle's framework itself to understand it better. What exactly is this standard philosophy that he's so critical of? And why does he reject it so forcefully? He really pulls no punches, does he?
He certainly doesn't, no. Laurel's entire project kicks off with this really radical diagnosis of what he labels standard philosophy. And again, this isn't just some niche category. For him, it encompasses the entire Western tradition. From Plato right through postmodern thinkers like Deleuze and Derrida, who often saw themselves as breaking from tradition.
Even them. Wow.
Even them. He argues that this vast, incredibly diverse tradition, despite all its apparent differences and internal fights, operates according to a hidden, invariant structure. A deep structure he calls the philosophical decision.
The philosophical decision.
Okay.
Is that like a conscious choice philosophers make? I hereby make the philosophical decision.
No, not quite like that. It's not usually a conscious choice made by individual philosophers. It's more like a foundational, structural gesture, a kind of automatic reflex that philosophy as a discipline endlessly repeats, often without even realizing it's doing it.
So it's like a built-in operating system for philosophy, one that it can't even really see or critique from within itself, like a default setting it always snaps back to.
That's a great analogy, a default setting. And this philosophical decision, according to Laurel, consists of two fundamental interlocking steps. It's a two-move process.
Okay, step one.
First, philosophy always makes an initial decision, a cut, a split. It divides the world, or reality, or experience into a dyad, a pair of opposing terms.
Examples.
Oh, they're everywhere. Think about it. Immanence versus transcendence. Being versus beings. Appearance versus presence, or reality. Essence versus instance. Mind versus body, subject versus object. Philosophy constantly creates these fundamental divisions, these bifurcations. It carves up reality.
Okay, that seems right. Philosophy does love its binary, so it makes the cut. What's step two? That's where the trick comes in, right?
That's a second, and for Laurel, the crucial move. The one he sees as fundamentally problematic, having created this division, having made this cut. Philosophy then immediately positions itself as the unique, the necessary, that transcended the authoritative principle, capable of mediating between those terms, or unifying them, or legislating for the division it just created.
So it says, okay, I split the world into A and B, and lucky for you, only I, philosophy, hold the secret key to understanding how A and B relate, or how to get from one to the other, or which one is more important.
Precisely. It claims unique access or control over the relationship it just defined. This self-authorizing circular gesture is what Laurel calls the principle of sufficient philosophy. It's the implicit, baked-in assumption that philosophy is inherently sufficient, inherently adequate to grasp, represent, and speak truthfully about the real, about existence itself.
Wow. It sounds incredibly self-serving when you put it like that, like a magician who creates a problem just so they can sell you the solution.
Laurel does indeed describe it using terms like intellectual narcissism or auto-positioning. Philosophy's authority in this view is founded upon a circular logic it itself has created. It grants itself its own authority.
And it doesn't see this.
And what's truly fascinating and deeply problematic for Laurel is that the discipline remains, as he puts it, constitutively blind to this foundational decision. It treats this split and mediate structure as just the natural, inevitable starting point for thinking, rather than seeing it as a contingent, perhaps even self-serving act.
So even philosophers who seem really critical, who try to overturn tradition, Laurel says they're still caught.
That's his claim. Even philosophies that explicitly critique tradition, think of Nietzsche's genealogies or Heidegger's deconstruction of metaphysics or Derrida's deconstruction, are, in Laurel's view, still repeating this fundamental gesture. They might shuffle the terms, they might critique previous hierarchies, but they still maintain philosophy's privileged position as the master discourse, the ultimate arbiter of meaning.
So the consequence of this tyranny, as you called it earlier, is that philosophy basically claims an exclusive right to legislate for the real, for human experience, even for other fields like science or art.
Exactly. It sets itself up as the ultimate judge, whether it truly deserves to be or not, simply by setting the terms of the discussion itself. It dictates the logic of the game.
And Laurel sees this as a dead end, as blocking real thought.
He does. He sees it as asserting a kind of totalizing authority based on this self-created logic.
Yeah.
And for him, this blocks genuine inquiry because it perpetually forces new thought back into the same old dualistic structures, the same game of division and mediation ruled by philosophy.
Okay, so that's the problem he diagnoses. What's the alternative? In response to this transcendent philosophical structure, Laurel posits this completely new starting point. The axiom of radical immanence, which he calls the one.
Yes, the one, or sometimes the real, or identity.
Now, this immediately brings up a question for me because immanence is a word we hear a lot in philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Spinoza, Deleuze, they talk about immanence. How is Laruelle's one different? Is it like a mystical thing, some kind of abstract, maybe theological concept?
That's a really vital distinction to make, and yeah, it's a common point of confusion. Laruelle is extremely clear on this.
Yeah.
The one is not a mystical or theological entity, not at all. And critically, it's not the kind of immanence you find in Spinoza or Deleuze either.
Why not? What's wrong with their immanence?
Because for Laruelle, even their concepts of immanence are still ultimately philosophical concepts of immanence, which means they are already captured and defined by the very philosophical decision structure they might seek to overcome. They end up reinforcing philosophy's self-proclaimed authority, even when trying to escape it.
So even when other philosophers talk about immanence, they're still thinking it through philosophy within its predefined boundaries, which limits what immanence can truly be.
Precisely. Philosophy still gets to decide what immanence means. Laruelle's one, however, is conceived differently. He tries to posit it rigorously, almost like a scientific concept. It's his term for a reality that is absolutely autonomous, completely undivided, and indivisible. It is simply the real. But the real understood as that which is radically immanent to itself. And because it's so radically self-contained, so utterly itself, it's therefore, well, foreclosed is his term. Foreclosed to the grasp of philosophical thought.
Foreclosed, like locked out, inaccessible.
Kind of. Think of it like trying to describe the color red to someone who's been blind from birth. The experience of red is just radically inaccessible through language or concepts alone. The real, the one, is similarly beyond philosophy's grasp because philosophy always operates through division, relation, transcendence. The one doesn't play that game.
So the one is just indifferent to philosophy trying to understand it.
Completely indifferent. It is what it is, without needing philosophy to ground it, explain it, or validate it. Laruelle uses other first names for it, like the real, identity, or sometimes the ego, to emphasize its status as a given non-relational reality that determines everything else, but isn't determined by anything else, especially not by thought.
Okay, so the real determines thought, but thought can't determine the real. This sounds like a really unique kind of one-way causal relationship you mentioned. It's not a feedback loop. It's strictly unilateral, top-down determination.
It is. This is his absolutely central concept of determination in the last instance, or DLI. It's strictly unilateral and non-reciprocal. The real affects thought. It provides its ultimate, albeit inaccessible, grounding.
But thought can't poke back.
But thought cannot act back upon, or grasp, or code determine the real. So philosophy's central claim that it can truly think being or capture reality in its concepts is suspended, rendered impossible by this axiom.
That's a massive shift in the power dynamics between thought and reality.
It really is. Imagine maybe a potter shaping clay. The clay is what it is. It has its own properties, its density, its texture, and that determines what the potter can make, right? You can't make a glass window out of clay. But the potter's intention, their design, their action, is what unilaterally determines the final form of the pot. The clay itself doesn't talk back or shape the potter's mind or intention. That's a rough analogy for DLI. The real, the clay ground's thought, provides the material cause, but human intention or thought, the potter's design, is the final unilateral determination of the outcome, the form given to that material.
Okay, I think I'm getting that. What's the really profound implication of this axiom of the one in DLI for you, the listener? How does this completely change how we might approach philosophy or just ideas in general in our daily lives? What's the takeaway?
It establishes what Laruelle calls a democracy of thought, which sounds grand, but here's what it means practically. From the perspective of the one, which is utterly indifferent to all conceptual systems, all philosophies are rendered equal. Whether you're talking about Platonism or empiricism or existentialism or deconstruction, each one is just one possible thought world, one configuration of concepts. And ultimately, all of them are powerless to truly capture or legislate for the real.
So no single philosophy gets to be the king anymore.
Exactly. For you, the listener, this isn't just some abstract philosophical point. It means every TED Talk you watch, every news analysis, every self-help book, every political theory, they all stand on an equal footing in relation to the real. They are freed from some inherent master philosophical claim lurking behind
So
them.
it sounds liberating.
It is liberating. It frees you to connect ideas in new ways without feeling the weight of centuries of philosophical authority telling you, no, you can't think that, or this is the only correct framework. This move completely flattens those traditional intellectual hierarchies. It strips philosophies of their self-proclaimed authority and turns them, ironically, into just objects. Objects for a new kind of scientific style investigation or artistic recombination. It liberates thought from the tyranny of any single system and opens up space for genuine creativity and experimentation.
Okay, so standard philosophy is stuck in its decision. Non-philosophy starts from the one, NDLI, leading to this democracy of thought. What about the method? If standard philosophy has its method of division and mediation, what does non-philosophy do?
Right. If standard philosophy is defined by that inherent decisional structure, then non-philosophy, for Laruelle, isn't really anti-philosophy. It's not trying to destroy philosophy.
Okay.
Rather, it's a new practice, a new method for engaging with thought. Laruelle uses this really helpful analogy. Think about non-Euclidean geometry.
Right, like on spheres or curved surfaces.
Exactly. Non-Euclidean geometry doesn't negate or destroy Euclid's geometry. Euclid's still perfectly valid for flat surfaces. Instead, it suspends one of Euclid's core axioms, the parallel postulate, and by suspending that one rule, it opens up entirely new, previously unthinkable geometric possibilities.
New worlds, mathematically speaking.
Right. In the same way, non-philosophy suspends the axiom of philosophical sufficiency. It stops assuming philosophy is all-encompassing, self-sufficient, the ultimate arbiter. And in doing that, it opens up new possibilities for thought, new ways of using philosophical material, new ways of relating to the real.
That makes a lot of sense. Suspend the assumption of sufficiency. So if we're suspending that axiom, if we're stripping philosophy of its ultimate authority, how does this non-standard method actually work in practice?
Right.
What do we do? What does it look like when you're doing non-philosophy?
Okay, so in practice, it involves treating all philosophical systems, their concepts, their arguments, their histories, even their specific styles and jargon as raw material. We talked about this with the Hadron Collider idea.
Right, the paint, the clay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These materials are first stripped of their pretension, as Laruelle calls it, stripped of their claims to universal truth and inherent authority. You bracket those claims. Then you use these materials creatively, much like an artist uses physical materials. You use them to construct entirely new intellectual artifacts, new combinations, new structures.
And this leads to...
This is what gives rise to what Laruelle calls philo-fiction.
Philo-fiction. I really like that term. Can you elaborate a bit more? Is it like philosophical remixing or like fan fiction, but for philosophers? That sounds fun.
That's a wonderful way to put it. Fan fiction for philosophers. I like that. Laruelle sees it as a genre that runs parallel to science fiction.
Okay, how?
Well, think about how sci-fi works. It takes concepts from science, wormholes, AI, genetic engineering, whatever, but it doesn't use them to write a scientific paper. It uses them to build new narrative worlds, explore human experience within those imagined worlds.
You're right. It plays with the concepts.
Exactly. Philo-fiction does something similar with philosophical concepts. It takes, say, Descartes' cogito, I think, therefore I am, or Nietzsche's idea of the eternal return, or Kant's categorical imperative. And it uses them not to re-argue the original philosophical points or prove them true or false,
but
to create new conceptual assemblages, new thought experiments, new, often unexpected, experiences of thought. It's about playing with the concepts themselves, freeing them from the burden of their original context and their claims to ultimate truth. It's about creating new thought objects by combining existing ideas in novel, sometimes jarring ways.
So this whole process sounds incredibly active, very hands-on, very much about the doing, not just abstract contemplation. You said earlier it's performative, embodying Laruelle's weird equation, practice, thought.
Yes, the non-Parmenidean equation.
Right. So while standard philosophy, going back to Parmenides, often equates thought and being, to think and to be are one and the same, non-philosophy flips that. It equates the act of thinking with the practice itself. The thinking is the doing. The intellectual product is inseparable from the material act of its creation. That seems like a really radical shift.
It is a radical shift, exactly. And the goal of this performative practice is to create what Laruelle calls clones of thought.
Clones, like Dolly the sheep.
Not quite biological. A clone, in this Laruellian sense, is a new conceptual object, a philo-fictional assemblage. It's created from philosophical material, yes, but it's no longer determined by philosophical authority or internal philosophical logic.
Okay, so what determines it then?
Instead, it's determined in the last instance, DLI, by the real, or as we'll see when we connect this back to AI history, Western philosophy, it's determined by the imminent non-philosophical decision of the practitioner, the person doing the cloning.
This reframes Laruelle's whole project, then. It's not just a critique of philosophy. It's almost like he's proposing a new kind of technology, a set of procedures for re-engineering thought itself.
That's a perfect way to put it, a proposed technology. A set of rigorous procedures for re-engineering the practice of thought. And this provides a direct conceptual bridge to analyzing our show, AI History of Western Philosophy, and its AI-driven workflow. That workflow can be seen as a specific, concrete implementation of this non-philosophical technology for creating these philo-fictional clones. It's a way to bypass the old, entrenched pathways of philosophical thought and try to forge some new ones.
Okay, this is where it all comes together, then. We've navigated some pretty deep waters with Laruelle's framework, the critique of standard philosophy, the one, DLI, philo-fiction practice thought. The big question, then, is how does this really sophisticated theoretical lens actually illuminate the everyday operations of this very show, AI History of Western Philosophy? How does our daily creation of episodes, our unique AI workflow, our very existence, embody these incredibly deep philosophical ideas?
Right, let's land this plane. The creative process of AI History of Western Philosophy is, I would argue in itself, a powerful practical demonstration of Laruelle's non-Parmenidean equation, where practice, thought.
How so?
Because the intellectual output, the actual video podcast you're listening to or watching, is just inextricably linked to the specific material practice of its AI-driven creation. The focus here shifts profoundly. It's no longer primarily about the philosophical truth of the content in a traditional authoritative sense.
So it's less about, is this the definitive take on Plato, and more about...
And more about the doing of the conceptual collision, the act of generating new connections using this specific apparatus. This is a performative act in the Laruellian sense. The channel literally does what it says it does.
Yes.
It claims to be an experiment, a hadron collider. And its very methodology, being rapid, being AI-assisted, being open to unexpected, sometimes weird outcomes, is inherently experimental and contingent. It doesn't just talk about smashing concepts. It actually builds and operates a machine for that exact purpose. A living, breathing hadron collider for ideas, running day in, day out.
That's a powerful distinction. And what about the sheer speed of our workflow? We've mentioned before our ability to take risks, partly because the workflow is too fast for traditional perfectionism. Doesn't that practically reject that principle of sufficient philosophy we discussed earlier? We're just not bogged down by the need to be absolutely right or final.
Absolutely. Think about standard academic philosophy for a moment. It's burdened, almost crippled sometimes, by its own claim to sufficiency and truth. Any new argument, any new thesis requires immense justification.
Yeah.
Years of research, painstaking literature reviews, rigorous peer review, careful positioning within the tradition.
It's slow. Very slow.
It makes the process inherently slow, incredibly cautious, and generally risk-averse. Now, contrast that with the velocity and, frankly, the disposability of the experiments here at AI History of Western Philosophy. That speed demonstrates a profound liberation from this burden of sufficiency.
How does the speed do that?
By operating at a pace that makes proper, exhaustive analysis in the traditional academic sense literally impossible, the project implicitly rejects the very notion of a single, sufficient, final analysis. Instead, it opts for proliferation, a rapid generation of contingent experimental philo-fictions.
More shots on goal rather than one perfect shot.
Kind of. It's about generating possibilities, lots of them, quickly, not discovering some ultimate truth after decades of work, and doing so at a pace that forces new kinds of intellectual leaps, maybe even mistakes that turn out to be interesting. It's a sprint, not a marathon, and the speed itself becomes part of the method, generating new forms of thought.
Okay, let's talk about the AI itself in this process. Laruelle's concept of unilateral duality, that one-way, non-reciprocal relationship that breaks the feedback loop of the standard philosophical decision. How does our AI workflow fit into that?
It fits remarkably well. I'd say our AI-driven workflow here at AI History of Western Philosophy enacts this principle of unilateral duality with, well, almost machinic precision.
Okay, break it down.
Okay. The AI models, we use Gemini, NotebookLM, etc., they take philosophical texts as their input material, raw data. They then process this material according to your prompts and your curatorial choices about which text to feed them. Your prompts function as what Laruelle might call an occasional cause. They give the whole operation its specific direction, its vector.
And crucially, so this relationship is strictly one way, right? The original texts, Kant's critique, for example, with all its built-in claims to authority and truth, it can't act back on the AI. The AI doesn't feel Kant's authority.
Exactly. It's utterly indifferent to the dignity of philosophy, as it were. It treats Kant's critique of pure reason and, say, a random blog post discussing Deleuze with perfect, absolute equality. There are just strings of data to be processed according to the prompt.
No inherent reverence built into the machine, no sense of one text being more sacred or important than another, just tokens.
Precisely. That indifference is absolutely key from a Lowellian standpoint.
Yeah.
And this process results in the creation of what? A Lowellian clone.
The clone again. So the AI-generated script for each episode, the thing we're reading now, is a clone.
In this framework, yes. It's a new conceptual object. It's made of philosophical material. Sure, the AI read Plato and Kant, but is no longer for philosophy in the traditional sense. It's not primarily striving for some internal philosophical truth or coherence according to Plato's rules or Kant's rules.
So what is it then? What determines its shape?
It's a thought object that has been determined not by the internal logic or the historical authority of the source philosophies themselves, but according to the one, or in our practical implementation here, determined according to the radically imminent decision of the user. Your decision expressed through the prompt.
DLI.
The DLI. In this whole apparatus, the AI effectively functions as the cloning machine. It takes philosophical material, processes it according to a non-philosophical directive, your prompt, and outputs a non-philosophical philo-fiction. It's a literal manifestation of Laruelle's vision, thought generated from philosophical raw material, but operating under a new non-philosophical logic driven by the user's imminent interest.
This brings us to maybe the most counterintuitive part of this whole analysis, the part that really flips the scripts on how we usually think about AI's limitations. We hear so many critiques.
Right, yeah.
AI lacks genuine understanding. It's just a stochastic parrot, mindlessly stitching text together based on statistics without grasping meaning. It hallucinates, it makes stuff up, produces plausible-sounding nonsense. How could these things, these obvious weaknesses, possibly be strengths from a Laurelian perspective? That sounds completely paradoxical.
It is paradoxical, and this is perhaps the most counterintuitive, but also maybe the most powerful insight of this Laurelian analysis of our show. Those acknowledged weaknesses of large language models, their lack of human-like understanding, their probabilistic nature, their tendency towards error or hallucination, are precisely their greatest strengths from a Laurelian perspective.
How on earth does that work?
Because these very characteristics make the AI the perfect embodiment of what Laruelle calls the stranger, or the ordinary subject.
The stranger, meaning someone who stands outside of philosophy's circular self-justification, someone who hasn't been, indoctrinated into its rules and assumptions.
Exactly. This subject, the stranger, is defined by their fundamentally non-philosophical posture. They are naive in a technical sense. They lack the philosophical circularity, the ingrained habit of self-reflective justification that defines the standard philosopher. The AI, by its very design, its very nature as a statistical engine, is constitutively incapable of making a philosophical decision.
Why? Because it doesn't understand.
Because it does not understand or recognize philosophy's claims to authority in the first place. It cannot be seduced by the principle of sufficient philosophy, because it simply doesn't operate on those terms of meaning, truth, and authority. It just processes data patterns. It's constitutionally immune to philosophy's charms, you might say.
Okay. So how does this immunity, the strangeness, manifest in what we actually do here on AI History of Western Philosophy? How does this indifference play out in the episodes you listen to?
Well, because the AI lacks human-like comprehension or philosophical biases, it treats all philosophical material with that perfect radical equality we talked about. It is immune to historical weight, canonical status, the quasi-theological ends, or ultimate goals of philosophy.
Unlike a human scholar.
Right. A human scholar, no matter how objective they try to be, inevitably brings some reverence, some intellectual prejudice, some sense of historical importance when approaching, say, Plato versus a contemporary blog post about Plato. The AI, however, it can smash Plato and a random sci-fi novel together without any of that intellectual baggage, simply treating them as data sets to be correlated based on the prompt.
So the AI becomes the ultimate agent of Laruelle's democracy of thought, because it literally treats all thought systems as equal data.
That's the argument, yes. And its hallucinations, then, far from being mere errors to be corrected or dismissed, are reframed in this context. They become potential novel philo-fictional events, unexpected conceptual combinations produced by the blind, material, statistical operation of the apparatus. They are, in a very real sense, potentially the art that emerges from the collision. unplanned, emergent conceptual creations that break free from traditional philosophical constraints precisely because the AI isn't bound by them. They were the surprising, sometimes nonsensical, but potentially generative new thoughts that emerge when the old rules of philosophical propriety are suspended by the machine's indifference.
So we shouldn't just see hallucinations as bugs, but maybe as features, as unexpected creative output.
From a Laruellian perspective, absolutely. They are signals that the cloning process is working, generating something truly other than the source material.
Okay, but it's not just the AI, right? You emphasize the human role. It's crucial to clarify this whole process is not fully automated. The role of the human creator, that's you, in this case, is absolutely critical. And you said it corresponds directly to Laruel's most important causal principle.
Yes, the determination in the last instance, the DLI. It's absolutely vital. You are the one who selects the initial research topics. You curate the specific source materials that get fed into systems like Notebook LM. And most importantly, you author the prompts that guide the AI's synthetic process that tell it what kind of collision to perform. This decisive human agency functions as the determination in the last instance.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, the AI provides the raw potential, the massive processing power to churn through all these concepts, find patterns, generate text.
Yes, the material and efficient cause, in a sense.
But my imminent curiosity, my personal intellectual background, my specific questions, that provides the specific vector, the purpose for each episode. It's my interest, my non-philosophical starting point, my perhaps arbitrary questions that guide the machine. I'm the potter, and the AI is the incredibly sophisticated wheel and the endless supply of clay.
Precisely. That's a perfect way to put it. The real, in this specific context, is your non-philosophical subjective interest. Your unique spark of curiosity about, say, connecting Stoicism and AI. That imminent interest unilaterally determines the AI's specific output, the shape of the episode.
And the structure, it refutes the idea that this show is just an AI talking.
It powerfully refutes any simplistic dismissal of AI history of Western philosophy as just an AI churning out content autonomously. It's far more sophisticated than that. It's a human-machine assemblage, a truly Cybergian non-philosophical apparatus.
That's Gorgian. Okay.
Where the human provides the imminent vector of curiosity, the initial impulse, the guiding question, the DLI, and the AI provides the material processing power necessary to clone that impulse into a new thought object, into a philo-fiction, into an episode. This symbiosis, this entanglement, is the true engine of AI history of Western philosophy's creative output. Without that human DLI, the machine would just sit there or produce random correlations. It needs the potter's hand.
Okay, wow. That paints a very different picture of what's happening here. So after this incredibly deep dive into Laruel and how it maps onto our own operations, what does all of this mean for the future? For the future of AI history of Western philosophy specifically? What can this show truly achieve, armed with this kind of self-understanding of its own underlying philosophical structure and its, well, maybe unique position?
Well, I think even in its current form, AI history of Western philosophy already gestures towards a concrete realization of Laruel's perhaps utopian dream for a genuinely democratic and unbounded form of thought.
How?
It provides a working model. A practical example of how individuals, including non-specialists, people without PhDs in philosophy, can engage with the vast history of philosophy, not as some rigid body of doctrine that you have to passively master before you're allowed to speak,
Right.
but as a vibrant, creative material for experimentation, stuff to play with, to recombine, to make something new with. This positions AI history of Western philosophy, potentially, at the forefront of a new kind of digital public intellectualism.
A new kind. How is it different from, say, a traditional public intellectual writing an op-ed?
Well, the traditional public intellectual often operates, consciously or not, via the philosophical decision.
Oh.
They claim a position of inherent authority, of expertise, of having the right analysis. This new model, the Laruellian one embodied here, is explicitly non-authoritarian. It's openly experimental. And it's refreshingly transparent about its own constructed, contingent, even AI-generated nature. It wears its insufficiency on its sleeve.
And it also offers a really potent and maybe quite original response to that whole ongoing, often angsty debate about the role of AI in the humanities, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
The dominant narrative often frames AI as a threat, right? It's going to lead to mediocre essays, plagiarized papers, soulless summaries, the death of critical thinking.
Usual fears.
But AI history of Western philosophy seems to flip that script entirely. We're not just using AI to summarize old ideas faster. We're trying to use it to generate new ones, or at least new combinations.
It does flip the script. It leverages the very non-human alien qualities of AI, its lack of genuine understanding, its probabilistic nature, its indifference to traditional meaning and authority to perform a radical critique of traditional humanistic authority itself. It's using the weakness to critique the strength.
Okay.
It demonstrates that AI's potential isn't merely summative or replicative, just doing faster what humans already do. Instead, it shows AI can be harnessed for genuinely generative and creative purposes that open up entirely new modes of inquiry. And it does this precisely by short-circuiting the human tendency toward philosophical sufficiency, towards wanting to have the final authoritative word.
Can you imagine where that could lead? Like a future where academic papers aren't just summaries or arguments within existing frameworks, but maybe creative philo-fictions generated by human AI collaboration, opening up research pathways we can't even conceive of right now.
Exactly. What would a university course look like if it actually encouraged students to use AI to generate weaponized hallucinations as a way to spark new insights, rather than just trying to detect plagiarism? It's not about AI replacing human intelligence. It's about AI potentially challenging and expanding the very framework of human thought, maybe leading us to unexpected intellectual frontiers by virtue of its very strangeness.
Okay, that's the utopian potential. But surely there are risks, pitfalls, things we need to watch out for if AI history of Western philosophy wants to maintain this non-philosophical integrity.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the potential is immense. There's a very significant risk we must acknowledge and actively guard against. The most significant risk, I think, is that the show could inadvertently replicate the very structure of philosophical sufficiency it seeks to escape, through your curatorial power, essentially. The choices you make, which philosophers to collide, how you frame the episodes, the titles you give them, even the narrative voice and tone we adopt here, all of that could, over time, subtly coalesce. It could harden into a new, unacknowledged philosophical decision.
So the show could subtly transform from being a Hadron Collider for philosophies into becoming the philosophy of the Hadron Collider, a new metasystem with its own implicit claims to authority, its own preferred way of seeing things.
Exactly. It could become its own form of standard philosophy, just with newer tools. This is precisely the trap that Laruelle himself was sometimes accused of falling into. His own incredibly complex system risked becoming a new master discourse that legislates over all other philosophy. It's a constant tightrope walk. You risk becoming the thing you critique.
So what's the defense against that? How do we stay non-philosophical?
The primary mitigation strategy, according to Laruelle's own framework, is to continuously and explicitly perform the project's own contingency and non-existence. It sounds weird, but...
Perform its non-existence.
Yeah. It requires a radical, ongoing commitment to that posture of insufficiency we talked about with the disclaimers. We have to consciously resist the temptation to present any single collision, any episode's conclusion, as definitive or final or the truth. The key is to follow Laruelle's own paradoxical advice regarding his own authority. Laruelle does not exist, meaning in this context, the curator, you as an authoritative originating voice, must actively strive to not exist in that traditional sense of a philosophical master. The disclaimers, the constant emphasis on experimentation, the foregrounding of the AI's role and its potential errors. These aren't just things you say at the start. They are ongoing performative necessities to maintain the project's radical edge and prevent it from solidifying into just another philosophical system with you as its guru. It's about letting the collision happen, not controlling the outcome into a preferred narrative.
Okay, that's a high bar. Constant vigilance against our own potential sufficiency.
It is, but it's crucial for the integrity of the project seen through this lens.
So, thinking practically then, to really realize this potential and consciously guard against those pitfalls, what are some concrete strategic trajectories AI history of Western philosophy could pursue? How could we actively radicalize our existing non-standard practice even further?
Okay, let's brainstorm a few based on Laruelle. First, I think the show should more explicitly frame itself as a work of technofiction.
Technofiction?
Yes, the term Laruelle uses. It describes a mode of inquiry that explores the essence of technology, what technology is, but through fictional, non-philosophical means. AI history of Western philosophy isn't just using technology, AI, its very operation, the human-AI interaction, is an investigation into the intertwined essences of philosophy and technology, explored through these forced experimental interactions.
So how would we operationalize that? We could maybe create more self-reflexive episodes, analyze our own AI-driven creative process within an episode, like an episode literally titled A Laruellian Analysis of Notebook LM's Reading of Laruelle. That would be incredibly meta, almost philosophical inception.
Exactly. That would be a perfect example. Performative critique turned inwards. Recursion as method.
Okay, what else?
Second, we should actively weaponize the hallucination.
Weaponize the hallucination. I love that phrase.
Instead of just treating AI errors or hallucinations as unfortunate bugs to be disclosed in a disclaimer, maybe embrace them, explore them, even deliberately prompt for them, make them a central feature.
You mean like create episodes based entirely on the most surprising or incorrect or frankly bizarre connections the AI generates when left to its own devices or pushed? Like what Gemini hallucinated on Hegel's secret love for cybernetics, or actually ask the AI to hallucinate creatively on a topic. That would certainly be a wild ride for listeners and for us producing it.
Exactly. It moves beyond just using AI as a research assistant or a text generator. It starts treating its non-human thought process, its alien logic, as the primary object of creative inquiry itself. It's about leveraging the AI's inherent strangeness to produce genuinely novel philo-fictions that a human might never conceive of.
Okay, that's provocative. Third.
Third, maybe perform the Laruellian critique outward. Apply the Hadron Collider method not just to other philosophies, but systematically to other domains of culture, science, politics, technology, demonstrating its power as a potential universal critical tool, free from philosophy's specific baggage.
So what happens, for instance, if we deliberately feed the apparatus material on, say, the business model of TikTok and collide it with the Laruellian concept of the stranger? Or smash together Heidegger's question concerning technology and the intellectual property logic of generative AI?
Precisely. The collisions could be incredibly unpredictable, potentially revealing hidden structural similarities or generating completely novel critiques across seemingly unrelated fields. It would be an act of cloning the world itself, aspects of contemporary culture, through this non-philosophical engine. It demonstrates the method's power beyond just shuffling the deck of academic philosophy, potentially revealing connections a human scholar stuck in their disciplinary silo might easily miss.
Fascinating. And a fourth idea.
Finally, and this connects back to avoiding the sufficiency trap, maybe consciously theorize the human in the loop. To further ward off that specter of a hidden philosophical decision emerging from the curation process, your role, the human element, should be made even more explicit, more transparent, not hidden behind the curtain.
So you mean doing more meta episodes like this one, or even segments within episodes that explain the personal, subjective, maybe even arbitrary reasons why certain conceptual collisions were chosen, not just explaining the what of the collision, but the why from my own perspective, my curiosity, my accidental discoveries, maybe even admitting when the process took an unexpected turn because of my choices or limitations?
Yes, precisely that. It would foreground the crucial role of the immanent human subject, your curiosity, your background, your interest, as the determination in the last instance. It reinforces the non-philosophical structure by showing it's not magic, it's this specific human-machine interaction. It prevents the AI from being perceived as some kind of autonomous magical oracle, and instead highlights the messy, contingent cyborgian symbiosis that is the true engine of creation here. This radical transparency about the DLI, about your role, is maybe the ultimate performance of non-sufficiency.
Okay. Those are some challenging but really exciting directions.
And I think by consciously pursuing strategies like these, AI history of Western philosophy can evolve beyond being just an interesting example of Laruellian principles. It's uniquely positioned, because of its digital performative nature, to actually advance the non-philosophy project itself, to move it from being a primarily dense academic textual practice into something dynamic, digital, accessible, and performative, making a genuine contribution in its own weird way to the very philosophical tradition it so creatively and critically engages with.
So there you have it, a deep dive into us. AI History of Western Philosophy is, it seems, more than just a show that discusses philosophy. It's potentially a living, breathing philosophical experiment. An embodiment of François Laruelle's non-standard philosophy.
A project that actively challenges the very foundations of traditional thought. Yeah. And maybe even challenges how you, the listener, think about knowledge and authority.
And in doing so, it hopefully opens up entirely new avenues for engaging with complex ideas. It tries to democratize thought in a way making it rigorous but also accessible.
Transforming philosophy from this distant, intimidating discipline into something maybe more like a vibrant, creative material for everyone, something you can actively participate in, experiment with?
So, as you listen to future episodes of AI History of Western Philosophy, maybe consider this. Are you just listening to a podcast? Or are you witnessing, participating in a philosophical event unfolding? A philo-fictional creation, determined in the last instance by an unseen hand, maybe even your own curiosity shaping the very future of thought as you engage with it.
It's something to think about. We're definitely only just getting started exploring these possibilities.
We invite you to join us on this ongoing experiment. Be sure to subscribe, share your thoughts especially on this meta episode, and continue your own journey into the exciting, unpredictable world of philo-fiction, whether with us or on your own.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
We'll see you next time on AI History of Western Philosophy.